Hey, what's going on, guys? This is AndrewChicken, and welcome back to another video. Makoa has gotten a whole slew of buffs this update, most of which revolve around his cards. More than half of his cards have received either a buff or a very slight rework to how they function, and so today I want to go over several different builds that you can make with Makoa using these newly buffed cards, and also just show you which cards are worth using out of these new buffed cards. So let's get into it. So before we get into the builds, let's talk about each individual card that got changed. So first we have Barrier Reef, and this card got a slight buff that is actually a little bit smaller than you might originally have assumed. Basically, this card now gives you 1 second of cooldown reduction on the shell shield for every 900 damage absorbed instead of 1000 damage. And this actually doesn't change much for the calculations, and most of the time, you're actually not going to be getting any more cooldown reduction than you were originally. This is mainly a buff that has to do with Guardian, actually. So let me show you exactly what's going on here. If I switch over to my calculator here, if we do 4,000, which is the base health of the shield, and then divide that by 1,000, obviously we get 4 seconds of cooldown reduction exactly. And if we divide it by 900 now, you see we would get 4.44444 seconds of cooldown reduction, but that's not how it actually works. Basically, the whole number here is the only part that matters. The decimal means nothing, so we're not getting extra cooldown reduction here. Every 900 damage that's absorbed, that's 1 tick of the cooldown reduction, and so we're only getting 4 seconds of cooldown reduction here. Exact same as it functioned previously. If we then use the card Carapace to increase the health of the shield by a further 1000, you'll see that the calculation still doesn't change. 5,000 divided by 1,000 obviously is 5. And then 5,000 divided by 900 has a whole number of 5. So we're still only getting 5 seconds of cooldown reduction here. But where things start to change is when we add Guardian into the mix. So if I take the original health of the shield and then multiply it by 1.45, which is the maximum amount of Guardian you can have, that will give us a shield health of 5,800. Previously, if you divided that by 1,000, you would get a whole number of 5, right? Because, yeah, you'd have basically 5.8 seconds of cooldown reduction, round it down, that's 5. But if we divide this number by 900, you see, we actually get a whole number of 6. So, instead of getting 1 additional second of cooldown reduction from 4 up to 5, we are now getting 2 additional seconds from 4 up to 6. So if you buy Guardian 3, Barrier Reef is now all of a sudden stronger. And the same is true if we start at a baseline of 5,000, multiply that by 1.45, 7,250, so we would expect from this to get 7 seconds of cooldown reduction. But if we divide it by 900 instead of the 1,000, right, we get a whole number, just barely, of 8. So if you're buying Guardian, that's when the Barrier Reef buff actually matters. Otherwise, this card isn't any stronger than it was previously. You still want to use this card in every single half-shell build you make, and I'll be showing a sort of off-tank, like, pluck build that uses this card too for some very funky shenanigans, but we'll explain all that later. But yeah, that's how the new Barrier Reef buff works. So if you want to get the most out of the buff, buy Guardian, but honestly, it's still worth going Chronos over Guardian because it'll give you a bigger boost to your cooldown reduction overall. Next, we have Determination, which is a much more straightforward buff. This card just gives you increased healing received while below 60% health instead of 50% health, so more uptime on this card. And it's very important to remember that this healing received buff actively counters Cauterize. So if you're familiar with the Rejuvenate rework, right, that item got reworked from an item that increases healing received to an item that increases healing output. Increased healing output does not counter Cauterize in Paladins. It does not stack additively against Cauterize. But healing received buffs still do. So this 30% that you get from this card takes 90% late game Cauterize down to 60% late game Cauterize, increasing your healing from 10% of your effective healing to 40% of your effective healing in late game if you were to run this card at level 5. So it's a very powerful effect, and now you have this up even more often. So that's actually a pretty sizable buff. Next we have Ebb and Flow. Now this is the first card that got a rework. So this card now always will reset the cooldown of Shell Spin after falling to or below 40% health. The only thing the scaling does is decrease the internal cooldown from 30 seconds down to 18 seconds. And the way the card previously worked was that it would change the amount of cooldown reduction you got based on the scaling. So at level 5 you would get 100%, at level 1 you would only get 20% after falling to or below 40% health, and it always had that 30-second internal cooldown. So effectively, what this rework has done is that it has turned Ebb and Flow into one of Makoa's best level 1 fillers, because at level 1, every 30 seconds, if you get to low HP, you will get your Shell Spin reset, so you can double Shell Spin, and you can reposition very effectively. I've tried this card out, and it's actually pretty insane now. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend running it super high. I wouldn't make it the staple of your build, but as a level 1 filler, this is super duper effective. After that we have Harden. Now this card was already one of the strongest cards in Makoa's entire loadout, because this card got buffed a while back to scale for 4 seconds instead of 2 seconds. 20% damage reduction, 25% damage reduction for 4 seconds is insanely powerful. But this card got an even further buff this patch. It now activates after using Dredge Anchor instead of after hitting Dredge Anchor, meaning that you can miss your hook and still get the damage reduction. I'm not a huge fan of this change because it makes Makoa a lot easier. It rewards him for missing his hook, and I just don't think that's a good design philosophy. But the point is now it's a lot stronger, and so you should be using this card. It is very, very good right now. Rampage got a small buff. It lasts 1 second longer. It now lasts 5 seconds to match the duration of lethality. Now we need them to buff it to 60% movement speed to match the speed of lethality. Just like Harden, Sea Legs now activates after using Dredge Anchor. However, it's just 600 healing after using Dredge Anchor at level 5, which I guess in a world without Cauterize would be pretty decent. But the fact is, you're the tank, you're almost always going to be affected by Cauterize. It's not worth it to invest 5 loadout points into this card, so just use Harden instead. Now Surf got kind of an interesting buff. This card increased the travel distance of Shell Spin by 50%, and now it increases it by 60%. So at level 4, you basically have the same effect as the previous level 5 card, which is pretty nice, and it's kind of an underrated card in my opinion, because the increased travel distance makes it a lot easier to hit people with your Shell Spin, and also it helps you reposition a lot more effectively, whether you're chasing a target or retreating. I've actually been enjoying the card a lot recently, so it's cool to see this one buffed. Then we have Tidal Grace, very small buff, probably the smallest buff, just a scaling increase. So at level 5 it now heals for 300 every second. Previously it had 55 scaling, now it's 60, so very tiny buff. And then lastly, Tsunami now lasts for 4 seconds instead of 3 seconds, which is actually pretty nice. 30% movement speed after using Shell Spin. If you have this card, and then you have Ebb and Flow, that's kind of a pretty good synergy. You can get a lot of uptime on that movement speed like that. So let's talk about builds. I have quite a few different sort of variations of Makoa builds here. A lot of them are actually just different variations of half-shell builds, but I also have a few really solid off-tank builds. I guess I just don't find the need to have much variation in my off-tank builds as much as my half-shell builds. So I don't know, don't worry about it. But up first, I actually want to show my main off-tank build that I've been using recently, which has been very fun. So this uses Strong Arm, which is a fantastic card. It didn't get buffed, but that's because it doesn't need a buff. 3 seconds off the cooldown of your hook, that is fantastic. Hook is Makoa's strongest ability by far, so the more hooks you have, the better. Then I have Surf. This is a card, like I said, that I've been experimenting with recently. And if we just take this into the shooting range, I will show you just how nice this movement speed sort of buff on the Shell Spin is. Because yeah, you go a lot farther. So if we just grab the sort of default Shell Spin here with a build that doesn't have the card, we go about that far. I mean, that's okay, I guess. But then, if we go ahead and switch on over into our off-tank Zoom build, and wait for the cooldown to come back, whee! Look at how much farther we go. And it all happens in the same amount of time, so you end up going faster, meaning you hit targets a lot more consistently. Now, that might not seem like a lot in the shooting range, but it can be the difference between getting behind cover versus not getting behind cover, or chasing down a target and getting them back in your line of sight versus not being able to do that. So I think it's a very underrated card, and it's a very fun card to use. Then I have Harden. Absolutely incredible card. 20% damage reduction for 4 seconds after using Dredge Anchor. I mean, come on, that is ridiculous. Especially if you're against hit scans, this is going to be a very big deal for you, because hit scans are infamously an excellent counter to Makoa. He has the biggest head in the game, and so damage reduction really helps him out. when he's up against those champions. Now, my filler cards, one of these should be very familiar. Salvage is the best level 1 filler card for Makoa, has been for a very long time now. Regenerate 1 ammo after activating Dredge Anchor. So if I consume all my ammo, and then I just go ahead and hook the Ying, I have an ammo so that I can hit the follow-up shot every single time I hook. Guaranteed, don't have to worry about hooking someone and then not having ammo to finish them off. So it's just a no-brainer to have this card. But I have switched out my other level 1 filler card for Ebb and Flow because, like I said, now this is an incredible level 1 filler. Previously, it only would have given you 20% cooldown reduction on your shell spin after falling to or below 40% health. But now, it completely resets the cooldown of it. So you can have a double shell spin, which is really, really nice. So let me show how that works over here with the Cassies. So I'm just going to get myself shot a bunch. Dink, 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 dink. And then one more for good measure. Boom, just like that. And you see how I have 2 charges of my shell spin there. So it resets the cooldown of my shell spin, but even if I already have my shell spin, and I haven't used it yet, I still retain that second charge. So that's what makes it so good. Like, it's not finicky at all. You don't have to worry about, oh, I have to use my shell spin before I reach 40% health, otherwise I'm not going to get any value out of this card. No, it just works. It just absolutely works. It basically turns it into a 2-charge ability, which is absolutely phenomenal. So that's really why I recommend using it as a level 1 filler this update. This buff has really made this card shine. Alright, now getting into the half-shell builds, just to switch things up for a little bit. I have a bunch of different variations of these, depending on the circumstance. So this is my normal half-shell build, designed for general gameplay. Ebb and Flow and Salvage are still the level 1 fillers. I have Strong Arm at level 3, which is, I like to think of it as my big filler when it comes to the half-shell builds, because Berry, Reef, and Carapace are usually the cards you want to run, and they just take up 5 loadout points each. So this will give you the most cooldown reduction on your shell shield and the most protection out of your shell shield possible, but Strong Arm will make sure that you're still able to have as many hooks as you can reasonably fit into the build without sacrificing your defense. So a very straightforward half-shell build. Then we have a half-shell build that's focused a little bit more on healing. So this is, yeah, very similar to the previous build, but it drops Carapace in favor of Determination. So we still have crazy cooldown reduction on the Shell Shield, we still have decent cooldown reduction on the Dredge Anchor, but now, when we're below 60% health, we get 30% more healing. So this is super good. If I'm not under the effects of Cauterize, then yeah, it's just a flat 30% more. Scales with my supports Rejuvenate as well, which is really nice. But when I am under Heavy Fire, under that Cauterize, this will make it so I'm getting 4 times the amount of healing under the effects of Cauterize, right? Because it takes 90% down to 60% Cauterize, which means I'm going from 10% effective healing to 40% effective healing. Super, super good. And yeah, same level 1 fillers. Then I have yet another build. This is a pure bunker build. So this is a build where I'm not focused on hooking. This is one of those builds where if you're playing, I guess, sort of like a Pirates style comp, or you're really just anticipate being under heavy fire as Makoa, and you need all the defense you can get, this is that defensive build. We have Carapace, Barrier Reef, so max cooldown reduction, max defense on the Shell Shield, and then we still have Determination for almost 20% increased healing received while below 60% health. So yeah, you can just mix and match these different cards to create half-shell builds for different circumstances. Now getting back to the off-tank builds, you can also see how we're mixing and matching cards, but generally keeping the same motif with this off-tank build, which is a healing build. It's the exact same as the previous off-tank build, however, I have swapped the Surf card for Determination. So this is actually quite a beefy build. It makes him very tough to kill without him having to rely on his shield. So it still has Harden, still has Strong Arm for max cooldown reduction on the Dredge Anchor, still has our level 1 fillers, but now we have 24% increased healing received while below 60% health. So yeah, this is also a very good build. You won't have the same levels of mobility, but it's still very reliable, very sturdy, and if you feel like you're going to be under heavy fire, then this is a better build to use. Now, finally, I want to show you something that's a little interesting. So this is an off-tank build, but a build that still gives you lots of shield reset. So when you play Makoa, the enemies often will avoid shooting your shield if you are playing half shell, because with half shell, everybody knows you play barrier reef or you're playing half shell wrong. So, you know, people are less wary about shooting the shell shield than they were in the past. In the past, you had to be a lot more careful. Now, people aren't so careful. But some people still try not to shoot your shield because they know they're going to give you cooldown reduction towards your next shield. But if you're not running half shell, people don't care, because they're like, oh, he's not playing half shell. Well, okay, he's not playing barrier reef then. And they don't usually check your build. So you can be really sneaky, and you can play this build with Pluck or Leviathan, and you can get a ton of cooldown reduction on your shell shield, just because the enemies aren't going to be paying attention, they're going to be shooting it. And so this can be really helpful. If you're playing off-tank Makoa, you still want to play Pluck or Leviathan, but you're up against a bunch of spam that'll be destroying your shield. You know, maybe some super high damage output hit scans, or maybe some blasters like Betty La Bamba that are just going to be spamming like crazy. You can block a ton of damage for your team, and you can still have the value of, yoink, huge Pluck damage. So it's a very interesting build, and one that I have found great success with from time to time, depending on the situation when I play some off-tank Makoas. So just thought I would share that. It's sort of, I guess, kind of a hybrid build. It kind of meets you in the middle, gets you a little bit of the best of both worlds. So yeah, there are a lot of directions you can take your Makoa builds in these days, but of course there are always some motifs, right? If you're playing half shell, obviously you want to run barrier reef and you can run more defensive cards. If you're an off tank, these hook cards are pretty good now. Ebb and Flow is an excellent new level 1 filler, and the shell spin cards can be pretty good too. And you know, another thing you can do is, I don't have a build for it right now, but if you wanted to, you could totally make a build that, instead of having Surf, has Tsunami, like this instead. So that's another sort of thing you can do. Lot of different ways you can build Makoa. There is, I guess, one final build. It's the meme spin build. I've showcased this build occasionally, just kind of being silly. It gives you instant reset on your shell spin for hitting multiple enemies, just like this. And it's a bit finicky, I guess, because I have them in bad positions. But yeah, basically, with Crashing Wave, you can reduce the cooldown of Shell Spin by 5 seconds for each enemy it hits. And then you can also Surf for increased travel distance, Spring Tide for a big 1k heal, and then Ebb and Flow and Salvage, just your level 1 fillers, or you could do something like this instead. And, yeah, it's not super practical, because you're not going to get the enemies lined up this much, but it is very funny, and I suppose there are some very rare circumstances where it could technically work. And if you're ever in a sumo game, then this build is actually pretty good. So, yeah, definitely the meme troll build of the video, but there's that too if you want to. So yeah, I hope that you found this video to be helpful. A lot of crazy new Makoa card changes, a lot of new build opportunities, and yeah, I just figured it'd be good, since you got so many card changes, to get you caught up to date on the latest builds for Makoa, what you can do with this character, what's good for him, what's not good for him. So yeah, make sure to like the video, subscribe if you're new around here, and if you want to support the channel directly, help keep the lights on over here, there are a number of ways you can do that. You can, of course, become a member on YouTube by clicking the join button down below. You can choose your price, get a whole bunch of perks. Or, if you were thinking of buying crystals, then you can do that over at my Nexus and support me directly there too. Basically, a portion of all the proceeds on that website go to supporting the channel. It's officially affiliated with Evil Mojo too, so yeah, would really appreciate it if you would check that out as well. But with all that being said, thank you guys for watching. I will see you all next time. Peace out.